engineers were like kind of actively, and I might regret saying this, but like I'm actively changing the definition of what an engineer is at the current company from like software engineers to product engineer, right? And the expectation there is that every engineer needs to have a much deeper understanding of the domain, the product, right?
James, thanks for joining us today. Give us a little, again, a lot of the people that we have watched this program and have comment and everything else. The thing that the theme they all love to hear is how you got to where you're at. You're doing incredibly well, head of engineering at this amazing company and so on. A lot of them are like, well, how did it happen, right? So I know where point B is. Where was point A, and how did that all map together? Because maybe when you were 16 or 18 years old, you didn't necessarily know this was the exact direction you were going in, and maybe not such a linear path.
Yeah. I think like many people, yeah, you asked me 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have predicted exactly where I would have been today. I've always been pretty technical growing up, always very hands-on. I think my education career, I always kind of know I wanted to be an engineer, like most engineers. Wasn't really sure which kind of engineer, right? So when I went to school, dabbled originally mechanical, spent like a year and a half in that, then switched to electrical, then diversified into electrical and computer, then added a minor, then double majored, then went to an accelerated grad program. Mostly because I think growing up, I always knew I had kind of the acumen or the interest in more of the like engineering disciplines, building things, right? How they worked, taking things apart, as my parents would probably more likely say. I think when I left college, right, it was mostly a set of relationships, right? Like I met people that were interesting, right? I asked them what they did, wanted to learn more about them, and I kind of like fell into a lot of kind of unique opportunities along the way. What I usually tell people, especially like in interview settings or like when I'm meeting people, is like I've never really worked the same job or the same industry twice. I think part of my personality and what has led to where I am today is I'm like constantly hungry, right? Like always looking for like learning and growth, right? Opportunities and people that are going to continuously challenge me is like, if there's one theme across my career and how I got to here, it's really that, right? Like I've never been complacent. As soon as I think I'm becoming complacent, I'm either pushing for, more responsibility or interest in other areas. And I think that has propelled me to where I am today. And along the way, a lot of really kind of like unique opportunities and cool things.
So what would you say is that number one thing, right? Like there's always that first step, that first leap of faith where it's like you're in college or high school, whatever it might have been, where you're like mechanical engineering, civil engineering, computer engineering. I don't know. Engineering's cool. I pull things apart. I rip them apart. But like, what was that first step where it was like computers is going to potentially be it? Who gave you that first step, and what did that look like? Because there's probably a lot of people that are listening today that are thinking the same thing, where it's like, I really like the idea of engineering, but how do you pop that cherry of like, I'm doing that thing, that's where I'm going?
Yeah, I didn't start with computers. I think, I was pretty fortunate. Like in elementary and middle school, we still had like shop programs. I think for some folks,
Yeah.
like, there was wood shop and automotive, and there were still those like technical programs as part of kind of like there's still home ec and stuff that I don't think really exists anymore. And I had a fortunate opportunity, right? That, kind of my last year as I went into like my freshman year of high school, they started this new program, which was about robotics, right? And it was not like robotics we talk about today, but it was like, very simple kind of things. And like, that was kind of my first real taste of it, of like of what would really be an engineering discipline. I can't even remember. There was like kits, I remember way back when, that had just came out. The school purchased them and was like looking to like facilitate a STEM program. And I think that was kind of like my first real like, oh, this is something that's actually like really interesting and engaging. Previously, I was like in wood shop and I'd done a bunch of other things that, were interesting, but they didn't really like spark that passion, right? And then I kind of pulled that thread a bit, right? Continued down that path, spent quite a bit of time like, participating in extracurriculars or other things that like deepened the hardware side of it. So I spent a lot of time working on like the mechanical elements, and more of that like hardware design. And then lo and behold, I was competing in a competition. I think it was in like early 2010s, right? Like a robotics competition. It was this thing called Sea Perch. Actually, it was sponsored by NAVSEA. It's the organization as part of the DoD that actually builds and designs like all of our naval warfare craft, right? So our boats, planes, like everything that goes into naval surface warfare. And they sponsored this competition for basically students, right, to compete at building what are autonomous or manned powered. It's autonomous now, but at the time it was ROVs, remote operated vehicles that were able to perform specific functions under the water, right? And that was kind of an interesting competition. Our school and like the people I was working with, it was like the first time we did it, right? A bunch of big schools that had spent like years doing that. The first year we competed, I had this guy, Jeff Merlino, came in from the Philadelphia, naval station that helped like kind of lead it. And we just did really well. I think we won regional states and went to nationals in the first year. And I think that was like this is something I might actually be good at. And then that kind of like spawned the rest of it. I think when I got to college and started doing more complicated things, right, I just kept getting frustrated. Where I was like, I can build the thing that I know it can do what I need it to do, but I have a bunch of these software people that are telling me, well, we can't do that automatically. And I think I just get kind of annoyed about it. And I was like, all right, well, it can't be that hard, right? Like, let me let me figure it out, right? And I think that's where it's like, well, I was just like, I didn't like the constraint. So I just kind of pursued it and continued to pursue it until I could get it to do what I wanted. And that kind of like fostered the love for how like computer and software systems can like intertwine like and really survive. So that's
and I see you being kind of head of engineering, specifically on the operations side. That's why you were like, yeah, I'm gonna battle. I'm gonna butt heads with these software engineers, and we're gonna go. Our hardware is capable of this, and we're going to challenge what applications are capable of doing by making sure that the operations, the DevOps, the infrastructure, all of that, the low level systems are able to, and the variety, the thousands and thousands of systems that could operate on will allow these applications to work.
exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's really incredible. Was there anybody, like you mentioned one person's name, right? Which it sounds like early on competition days. It's really cool. Where some people are like, oh, I don't remember how I did this thing or who I worked with. You very clearly remember somebody that came down and helped you with a competition, and so I have to imagine. Did that person become a mentor? Did they stay a mentor? Did you have different mentors along the way? What did that look like as you started rising through the ranks to eventually be head of engineering?
Yeah, I've honestly been really fortunate, right? Like I look back and I think I have benefited from some like really incredible people like through my whole journey, right? Like, and some of those people I still talk to, right? Some of them I don't, right? But I think at different points in my life, right? It's coincidence or luck or whatever you want to call it. Like, I had like kind of the right people at the time to really help me with the thing I was working on, right? Like, I switched kind of like very drastically. I was like very committed, this hardware software stuff. I did like a fellowship, um, at the Glenn Center in Ohio with NASA and was like really committed to that, like going down deep in the like, electromechanical and software side of things. And then I like stumbled across just like happenstance, this company called Jet way back when, right? Which was like, kind of an up and coming startup, right? Didn't really know anything. Really wasn't a good hire, candidly. I don't really know how or why they hired me. But I met some people over there and they were just like really interesting. And what they were working on was just like really fascinating. They were so passionate about it. And there was this other guy, Jeremy Kimball, was one of the VPs there, one of the first hires at Alvys or at Jet, and this other guy, Leo Gradinsky, who I actually now work with again at my current job, were kind of early folks at that company. And like, we're just really passionate. They were doing functional programming, which I knew nothing about, candidly, like zero. It was just like a completely foreign concept to me. And I think because of that and the problems and the scale they were going after, it was just like a very fascinating thing. And that was kind of like my first taste of the drug, which I think is like high growth startups. And, I think I've been hooked since. And I think, a lot of people along that journey, I still talk to, I'm actually working with one of them again. I've hired a lot of people or I'm working with people, from various walks of life in different companies that kind of had that same passion and, just hunger for growth. And I think I have just been really fortunate in having just found people and places that really incentivize and believe in that type of culture. And it's been great, right? Like, I don't know else how to
Well, no, I got what you're saying. High growth startups are drugs, and you are advocating for people doing drugs. That's what we're,
yeah, maybe certain kinds of drugs, but yeah.
Just kidding. So you mentioned in there that you were a bad hire for Jet. So you're this. They made a mistake. Clearly, they didn't. Right? You're amazing, and you've risen through the ranks at multiple places. But in your mind, you're like, all right, I was a hiring mistake. I'm in your position you're in now. You do a lot of hiring. That is your job is to build the engineering team. That means at Alvys, because they're amazing, you've made great hiring decisions, but you've probably made some bad ones too. You've probably had some mistakes along the way. Give me a little bit of what you've learned or some mistakes that you've made in the process of building engineering teams across multiple different companies.
Yeah, I think every company I've worked at has had unique hiring challenges, right? I think the current company I'm at, so Alvys is a vertical SaaS company. So we build, sell software specifically focused in the logistics space, going after kind of an underserved market, which is specifically like trucking companies, right? Like carriers and brokers, and to some extent, shippers, right? Which is a fascinating space because it's exceedingly complicated operationally. But this is a very unique company. It's the first fully remote company I've ever worked at, right? Not by choice, right? Obviously, we all, I think, experienced a little bit of that during COVID, but like born and bred kind of remote, right? That's a very complicated thing. It gives us the benefit of being able to hire kind of anywhere, right? And I have teams kind of all over the world. I think we're in a total of like 13 countries now with some people. Now, we have a lot of people standardized in a few places, like in Europe, in the US, and Latin America, but we have people like kind of all over the place. And I think that is both an asset, right? It allows you to get the right people for the right job at the right moment, right? Without the constraints of like, well, you have to move and things like that. And I think that is awesome and fascinating, but it's hard, right? Like building culture, building teams, building efficient operations is really difficult in a remote setting, right? And I think I got very used to building teams in remote, like in person settings, like in New York and in other places where like there's a certain level of like interpersonal communication and perception that like when you interview people and you work with them day to day, like there's just something about that, right? That allows you to kind of get the measure of a person in a different way than in a remote setting, right? The way we convey ourselves and present ourselves in remote is not always in reality how we are in person. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic. So I think the thing I've learned over the years, hyperscaling teams very quickly anywhere in the world, right? Whether it be in like China, India, Latin America, Europe, is it's all about getting the right first hires, right? Like, for regions to work out, it's really about being meticulous and methodical about those first few people. And those first few people, it's not so much about looking for people that have done the job, right? Like, I think that's often where a lot of hiring managers, like, they look at the resume and like, hey, we need somebody that's done X, Y, and Z. Like, only show me resumes that have done X, Y, and Z. Like at high growth startups, like you almost want to look for the opposite, right? Because you don't know what X, Y, and Z is going to be tomorrow, let alone 6 months from now. You want people that have a track record of growing, being hungry, learning, and like having a really high sense. I talk a lot internally with my teams here and in previous, like good engineering teams, in my experience, right, are very simple. They do two things and they do two things really only, right? They get really good at committing to doing something, right? Hey, we're going to do this, right? And we're going to do it on this timeline, right? And then they deliver on that thing, right? The engineering teams that operate kind of peak efficiency are empowered and they're trusted. And their real guideline is like, well, we need you to do X, we need you to scope and commit to it, and then you need to deliver on that timeline. That's kind of like a perfect recipe for high accountability, high ownership teams, and then pushing down a lot of that kind of decision making down to the bottom level where it really matters and it really is impactful. That has paid dividends, right? Over the years of like that type of mentality. And I didn't create it. I've benefited from being at companies that really believed in that at an executive level. And I've tweaked and refined and expanded on it in areas. But I think I have had the best success running, building, and leading teams that really have that at their core, right?
What's your favorite region? Are you going
Yeah,
to say
that's a tough one.
North America? North America is way cooler than Europe. You guys should have like a company like soccer tournament, like the Europeans versus the Asians versus the Americans, and really
I
make it weird for everyone.
Yeah, I've had teams on pretty much every continent. I think it's fat. I think that's another unique thing is like, working in Asia or working in like Latin America or in Europe, like they're all so culturally different and trying to bring teams together that are so different, right? Like they don't watch the same sports. They don't play the same games. They don't
They
have the
don't have the
same
same
tradition.
holidays.
Yeah.
They don't have the same holidays. So when you're taking the 4th of July, it's like this big deal for your American group, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, barbecues and 4th of July, and
Or
we're off on such."
Thanksgiving or Box Day
And
or all
yeah, and
Exactly.
so
And
for
even
them,
in
it's
North
wildly
America,
different.
right? Even in North America, like Canada compared to the United States, like we have different holidays, like Boxing Day, like so.
Yeah.
So I think that is, I think it's fun, honestly, right? Like I think one of the unique things is when you have the right culture and the right people, right? What kind of organically happens, right? Is like people get interested and exposed to these things and like want to participate. Like we've done things for like Mardi Gras, and we've done things for like Orthodox Christmas that like I didn't know anything about, right? So I think it's fascinating to see how the teams evolve given the kind of diversity of both like experience and culture, and I think it's kind of fun, right? Now I think some companies like lean into that. I think Alvys is one of those companies that has leaned into that, right? Just like kind of respecting and fostering that. And I think some other companies, it's like, well, yeah, that's just it's a constraint of doing business. Well, in this market, they're going to have this week off in Brazil, or they're going to have this amount of time off for New Year's or whatever it is. But I think it's
you
about
like
finding the
hire in
balance.
Australia and they're going to take a 3-hour lunch and they're going to show up drunk on the second half of the
Yeah,
day.
it's like
You know, this is what you're going to deal with.
I have a team in Dublin right now, and like that's they're not really showing up drunk, but like drinking is a big part. Like when we go out as a team at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, like, that's the thing. And we might go back to work right after that because something goes wrong. So I think
Nice.
the
All
interesting
right.
dynamic is like when I was working with teams in China, it's like that's a full 12-hour shift off of Eastern, right? Like if you want to meet with those teams, somebody's getting up early or somebody's staying up late, right?
Yeah,
That
well, last night I was on a call with the development team from 9:30 to 10:30 at night because they're in, India, and so they have a very different time frame than we have. And I could either force them to meet with me at the beginning of my day, which is the end of theirs, which then they don't accomplish that much, or I do it at the very, very end of my night, but it's really more the start of their day, and then whatever design ideas and so on, then they can go implement.
I am curious, where do you believe that the future workforce is going, right? So I talk to startups every week. We work with a lot of venture-backed startups. We work with it as early as like stage, seed, VC rounds, whatever. San Francisco and New York are really starting to push this RTO, this return to office, and trying to get people back into the valley, getting people back into New York. And there's obviously some friction there where some of the developers are like, we could do this worldwide. Like, why don't we do that? And I hear all the other catch-22s, which is like, well, cost and investment and nearshore, offshore. Like, where do you believe that the future of development is going to go? Do you think that we're going to progressively see more and more companies go global? Do you believe that people are going to start tightening back up? Because again, I'm just seeing a lot of trends going back to the Bay Area, going back to New York.
Yeah. It's a great question. One I get asked kind of frequently. I think there is no one size answer to it, right? Is generally what I tell people is like, it really depends on your company, right? So like, for example, if you're building operational software, you need your EPD teams, right, closely aligned with your end users, right? Like, if they're halfway across the world, they can't benefit from that interaction that's invaluable for a designer or an engineer to really understand like those like little idiosyncrasies and nuances that are really impactful when you're building that type of software, right? Now, there are other businesses where like, for example, like Alvys is at a certain scale and size that we can support and are and do and grow like a global footprint because it makes sense from a management. We run a 24-hour dev cycle, right? Like, so I think it really depends on the type of business you're trying to build, right? The stage at which you are. Like, if you're building something that nobody else has built before, there is an inherent benefit. And I kind of miss it to like being together. Like my company before this company called Wonder, when I joined Wonder, it was like an insane idea, right? I think I was originally pitched on like basically right at the start of COVID, right? Hey, we want to like completely fundamentally change the way people think about at-home dining. And I was like, okay, as a pitch line, tell me more, right? And they were like, well, you know how anytime you like order like a milkshake in the middle of summer or you order French fries, it shows up and it's just kind of crappy, right? Like it's melted or they're soggy. It's just not the same experience you'd get in a restaurant. Well, everybody's doing it wrong, right? Everybody believes that the issue is like, how do we like shorten cycles or how do we better optimize? But they're all fundamentally wrong because you're all stuck with the same constraints, right? Like, you don't necessarily know what you want when you're ordering. So we want to completely change it. So the original pitch was like, we're going to go build effectively high-tech food trucks, right? That are going to show up on demand as you order, park outside of your house in your driveway and cook food on demand at a Michelin star quality. And I was like, that sounds wildly impossible, right? And lo and behold, it's actually not that impossible and it can be done, right? And I think that is the type of stuff that like, when you first hear about it, you're like, well, it's like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. But a big part of that, like in the middle of COVID, we're building a food business, right? Crazy idea, right? I'm in person on site with the chefs on the trucks, like, and that was the only way this type of business gets built, right? Because you had to be in the thick of it, right? And I think to that point, I think there's a time and the place for being in the office, being together, collaborating, working with your end user. I also think there are many companies that benefit and can compound value on being remote, being able to hire anywhere, running, multinational teams that have coverage models that make a lot of sense. So I think the big theme to like give you a real answer, I think it's less about where and like return to office, not return to office. I think, and the things I've been driving internally with my teams is that I do not believe in fixed disciplines anymore, right? I'm kind of like a poster child. Like I do product work. I lead our support team, which is customer facing. I lead IT. I lead engineering. I manage QA. And I like to be hands on in all of those things, right? Because it helps me as a leader better understand. And because of that, and I've had this kind of like belief for so long that like the best engineers are the ones that can do front end and back end, or front end and mobile, or mobile front end, back end, DevOps, infrastructure, product, etc. Like it just never ends. Those people are force multipliers. Now, traditionally, it's pretty impossible to find those people at scale, right?
Do you think AI has changed that?
Exactly, right. And I think that is where internally we have been really like doubling down on this idea where like using AI, right? You don't need to be the best front ender anymore, right? To still deliver value and deliver it very effectively and like well with the advent of AI. So I have like, we've diversified like product designer into UX engineer, right? It's a designer that's also writing the code, right? It reduces all of the intermediary, right? We're now having product people prove that they can build a prototype, like can code as like a hiring requirement, right? You need to be able to like prototype and express your ideas without relying on 3 or 4 other people, right? To be able to hand it off to engineers or to designers, et cetera, to then expand on that capability. Engineers were like kind of actively, and I might regret saying this, but like I'm actively changing the definition of what an engineer is at the current company from like software engineers to product engineers, right? And the expectation there is that every engineer needs to have a much deeper understanding of the domain, the product, right, the end user, and they need to be able to be customer facing to shorten those cycles, right? When a customer has a problem, being able to get on a call with a customer directly, hear the feedback firsthand, understand it, right? And then implement or, define the requirements and then implement those requirements is such a profound, like force multiplying effect, right? That like AI is a big part of all of those workflows I just explained.
Yeah, we are
That
definitely seeing it more and more with all of our clients where product engineering becomes important, where it's like engineering, like coding isn't enough anymore. Coding isn't the main factor anymore. Like your ability to write code almost doesn't matter. Like it does. What really matters is like, do you know design and architecture? Can you understand trade-offs? Can you anticipate what the potential trade-offs are going to be for your end users, for your customers, for what it's going to look like in terms of like, where are you at today? Where are you going to be at in 5 years? So understanding, are we going to be built to scale, or are we going to have to redistribute and refactor this in 5 to 6 months? The other part is do we understand the actual end user? To your point, we have to be closer to the product than we've ever been before. And the engineer's job is to understand business value more than just functional programming. And it's been really interesting to see that. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is you made a comment earlier, which was like the most important thing, especially as when you're going out into new regions, whether that's Brazil, Latin America, Europe, Croatia, wherever you're building, Asia, wherever you're building your team, the first hire or two are radically critical. And when I think about going into new markets and going into new regions, a lot of startups and companies, they lean on their network, they lean on who they know. And so I am curious about like, how do you effectively make the decisions on how to find that first person? Are you doing it in-house? Are you leaning on global recruiting agencies? Are you relying on partners? Like, how are you expanding your network to make sure that you're capturing the right first hire in net new markets?
Yeah, and I think that is the $1 million question, right? I think I drive teams for outcomes over output, right? I think that's been the big shift, right? So I think the first thing I look for in any market, I think using networks, I've used them extensively. I've hired a lot of people over the years through my network or through employee networks as referrals. Like it is one of the most effective growth journeys. And any leaders that have really like hyper scaled team will tell you that like there's a limit, right, to how much you can do through like social networking, right? Like people that you've know or worked with, like there's kind of an upper bound to how quickly you can grow a team through that channel alone, right? And more importantly, if like, let's say today I'm like, I want to go build a team in Australia, right? Well, I don't have a network in Australia. Well, actually, that's not totally true. Well, let's assume I didn't, right? Like I might not know anybody there, but how do I find those first key hires to stand up in office? Well, part of it is like you go get to the space, right? So first, typically I've either worked with internal recruiters or I've worked with external agencies that specialize in the market and the region, right? We kind of start screening candidates. We start like tailoring the profile. We find a couple of people, maybe they're participating in meetup groups. I'll go attend a few meetups, right? And so like build that network there because those first two hires are really important, right? And the people I tend to look for when standing up a new region or an office, right, are one, people that really have a deep sense of accountability and ownership and that want to work in an environment that drives outcomes, right? That I can build a team around. So they have to have that kind of like cultural kernel, if you will, right? That I can then form the rest of the team around them. The second thing that's really important, right, especially with international teams, is they need to be very technically proficient, right? They might not know exactly the things we might need them to know. Maybe they were a Java developer and we're going to do TypeScript or, vice versa. But they need to have that deep technical understanding, right? Because that's what effectively we need them to be able to own and operate, to mentor, evaluate other talent and criteria to then grow the region around. So it's a very tricky thing, right? I think the team, my management team, some of my managers ask me pretty often. I have apparently a pretty unique interviewing strategy that like I don't really ask. I let the team now ask some of the technical questions, but like when I do technical interviews, like I for the longest time and even now today when I do I have a technical interview right after this one, right? I don't believe, and I haven't for a long time. It's like I give them like production code and I say, well, tell me what's wrong with this, right? Or what would you do differently here, right? Like I don't really care if they know the language or not. Like I'll walk them through the code. It's partially looking at, hey, can they have a live conversation and collaborate and debug something in real time, even if they're unfamiliar with it? Because that's really the job, right? Like that's what these people are going to do day in and day out, right? And then can we have a good discourse, right? When I'm doing technical interviews, right? Rather than like put a leak code board up on the board and like evaluate, have you memorized, 600 problems? Well, anybody can do that with enough time and energy and investment, right? It's really about looking for people that can work and learn and grow at skills that they're unfamiliar with. And, that's kind of the critical thing. And on the cultural side, I asked some, interesting questions about, you know, do you make your bed in the morning? Right. That's one of my favorite cultural questions. Like, um, it's not
So
polarized.
what if they say no?
Yeah, and I asked them why. Right? Do you have any routines? Right? You do day in and day out. Right? It's not so much about a right or a wrong answer. It's about understanding them as a person. Right? And when you ask this question enough, right? And I have a few other questions, right? Like this one, like you get a good sense of like the types of people and how they answer this, right? And then generally how that you build kind of your own internal benchmarking and like how they perform in job, right? Um, it's not
What
about
are
whether they make their bed or not. It's just they have different skills, right? They think about the world differently. They think about their day differently, their time management differently. And I think that's a really telling thing for a manager to understand when you're making a critical hire is like, is this person going to be effective and really methodical and need everything kind of in its place and they're going to be really good about time management, or is this person like going to thrive in the chaos and you can drop them into like a less functional team and they'll kind of pick it up. Like those are really important indicators early on.
Yeah, I'd be curious what some of your other questions are. One of the questions I had, like a sales mentor back in the day, that used to always ask was, let's pretend like you're stuck on an island, and 100 yards off of the island is a boat, but between you and the boat is a shark. What do you do? And they just wanted to see, like, how would I answer that question? Would I stay on the island? Would I go to the boat? Would I battle the shark? Would I not battle the shark? Would I build a life there? Would I try to execute and find a way to distract the shark? Like, he wanted people that would just answer the question, and he wanted just to see how they processed that particular function. And it was like he decided for salespeople that were hunters, they always had to figure out how to get to the boat. For the people that were farmers and more account managers, they built the island. It was always interesting, and that was like always his fundamental, like, secret sauce was like
You
how to
started the
find the right
question, and I
person.
was like, I thought I was preparing myself. I'm like, Tyra Banks, Elizabeth Hurley. I'm like, oh, I thought you were going to ask who I wanted to be stuck on with.
No, not stuck on the
Uh,
island. But what would you do? But I'm curious that what were some of those other, like, questions that you have? You had one which was like, do you have a bed? Do you have a routine? Do you make your bed in the morning? I don't. My bed is
if
was
you were a
I've never made my
sandwich,
bed in like 10 years.
if you
But
were a sandwich, what kind of sandwich would you be and why?
I actually that is one of my questions. I
I
do
like
ask
it.
the sandwich question. I try to like I have dabbled in the scenario questions, right? Like, you know, you're on the 15th floor, the elevator breaks down. Well, what do you do? Right. You try to pry it
Elizabeth
open. You
Hurley.
try to like, so I've asked those questions. I think those questions, I think, do best to figure out how people are going to problem solve. I have a different set of questions I typically ask. What I really like to look for is like things that anybody, because I ask the same question, whether I'm hiring a support agent, an engineer, a product person, an implementer, right? Like, I like questions that are just like kind of very unbiased and that like it tells you whether they're going to be a good fit in the role that they're interviewing for. And I'm always looking for new ones. I usually mix it up so that like now that I've told this on the podcast, I won't ask that question anymore. I'll have to find a new question for a while, right? Because I've had that happen a few times where like I say something like on an interview or at a conference or something, and then all of a sudden, like the next six people like have a particular answer because they think that's what I want to hear, and I'm like, well, that's not the point of the question, guys. Like, there's no right or wrong answer. Like, I want you to just be honest. Like,
I always found that, when we talk about that and people are like, well, I asked this question and this is the answer I'm looking for. I've always found that it sounds great for a interviewing book of how to interview. Again, I've interviewed 5,000 people, maybe more. And I can tell you
way
people,
more.
probably
Way
more. And now you're making me feel old. I don't know that I've ever had an answer that I could exclude someone or include someone based on it. Now, I've had ways they've answered it, like the sandwich question, right? I've had people tell me they're a turkey and cheese sandwich because I'm just, the normal American, whatever. I've had people say peanut butter and jelly because I have, two opposite sides of my life. And I'm like, great. It doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you're going to be good at being a
yeah,
recruiter, being a salesperson, being an engineer. I just want to know, can you engage with me? Can we talk? Can we have a fun conversation? Can you maybe make me laugh? Because if I enjoy working with someone, I believe they will be good at that is an indicator. Obviously, there's technical aspects of all jobs, but it's an indicator that I'm going to enjoy working with them. I'm going to enjoy coaching them versus if they really struggle to just carry on a conversation about a sandwich. That to me,
a
it's less about the
100%.
answer.
And like, even to your point, it's like people that try to tailor their answers to what they think you want to hear, right? Like that's why I like asking, like when I ask technical questions and I tell my team, and I mentor a lot of people at this, right? Like is I tell them like, do not ask a leak code question and expect one answer. Like it needs to have multiple solutions to it, because you're not looking for like, do they know the right optimization, the right algorithm? You're looking, can they reason and deliver an outcome? And then you challenge them on that outcome and say, well, what about X or what about Y, and see how they collaborate, right? And I think that is something that so many people miss. And it's really a shame, because I think that's where you see a lot of companies just hiring to like the resumes. And then there's like these whole businesses, not to
Yep.
offend businesses, that just basically teach people, right, how to try to pass the interview, right? Like
Yep.
there's something wrong with the interview if you can build an entire business model on getting people to pay you on how to pass the interview, right? Like it's just, it always has bothered me. And,
Yeah, bottom line, Microsoft does horrible interviews. No, I'm kidding. We're not even talking about Microsoft. So tell me, because we've taken a lot of your time and I appreciate it. And you got an interview coming up, which is awesome. So we should podcast, live stream in the interview. The poor person sitting on the other end of that interview is like, oh.
Undercover interview.
Yeah.
Undercover boss.
So what kind of sandwich would you be and why?
It's a great question. I have I mix it up right now. I am very much into barbecue, right? So I've been like,
Good answer so far.
refining my barbecue skill set. So I usually go a brisket sandwich, fried jalapenos, garlic aioli, right?
There we go.
That would be my current sandwich choice, right?
And it's because brisket is like the finest piece of barbecue. The jalapenos because you're a little spicy, and garlic aioli because you're very refined. Is that where we're going with this?
I mean, if that's what you take out of my answer, I will take that.
All right. I'm an Italian beef because I'm from Chicago and I'm not even Italian, but I'm going back to Chicago and I'm excited to get an Italian beef when I'm there. Shane, what are you?
I'm a glutard, so I'm not eating a sandwich. I'm picking up.
Boy!
I'm sorry.
So
I'm doing a birria taco. That's what's happening.
Here's what we know, James. You're hired. I'm hired. And
I'm going to go run my own business because I disagree with all of you.
Yeah, but I think the fun part is I've had people answer, well, I don't do sandwiches, or like, I don't think I've ever heard what did you call it? A glutard? Like it's like, just like
he can't have gluten.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating answer. And you said, birria taco, I would be like, great, right? I think there's no right or wrong answer. It just tells me a lot about the person, right? Of like, certain people I know are going to be good in certain roles. It's like I've hired a lot of very creative people that like I ask these types of questions and they answer, like that, and I'm like, you're going to be great for this role, right? Like non-traditional thinking, I would call it.
Yeah. Okay. So Shane, you're a non-traditional thinker. That sounds pretty accurate.
Actively professionally unemployed. Let's go.
All right. So James, for those people who are like listening, because right now you guys obviously you're doing interviews, so Alvys is growing, and you're looking on bringing on more people on the engineering team. How can they get a hold of you if they want to tell you what kind of sandwich they are?
Yeah, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. Always available on LinkedIn. They can hit our careers page. It is evolving. In January, you'll see more of those posted. We're kind of getting jump a little bit, or I guess I am, on some of that interviewing. But careers page, please submit applications. You can always hit me up on LinkedIn. Generally, the advice I give to people when I do things like this is like, I get a lot of in-mail garbage and LinkedIn garbage. Like, I don't care about what you think I want to hear. I want to hear about you, right? What makes you interesting and engaged and want to work here? And like, I think those tend to bubble up to the top of my inbox. And I have surprisingly found a lot of really cool people over the years, just like complete cold call emails. They're like, hey, I don't have a CS degree. I don't know shit about engineering, right? But I did this thing and I'm really passionate. I hired this one guy that was a League of Legends admin, right?
Nice.
And he was just like passionate about it. He's like, I was running this team. I've been teaching myself this script, and we hired him as like an engineer, an early stage engineer. And like, he has grown over the years and he's kind of a kick-ass guy. But I think, I want to hear people that are passionate about, even if we don't have a role for you today. Like, it's amazing how many people I've met over the years that like, even if I don't have a role for today that you're a good fit for, like, who's to say 3 years from now There's not some different role that's available that, that one guy that did that one thing one time, right, might be a good fit for.
All right, so there's your secret. When you reach out to James Novino, make sure the subject line is what kind of sandwich you would be, and then explain it why. I love it, but that shows genuine. It shows passion. Everything else. James, thank you so much for joining us today. For everyone who's been listening, connect with James on LinkedIn. Go to the careers page on the company website, etc. This was a ton of fun. Thank you so much, and good luck in the new year growing Alvys.
Like, subscribe, all the things that you should be doing. And
all the things that you do on YouTube and everywhere else. All right, everyone, thanks for joining. Bye-bye.